Okay. Yeah, today I'm musing on the same kind of stuff that I'm always musing about, kind of the God world relationship. And in other terms, I would put it as the relationship between logic and what you might call contradiction or the absolute, the principle of non contradiction, either X or not X, and the absolute, both X and not X. Um, there's kind of a cool video that I've found on this topic about Neoplatonism, characterizing the relationship between structure and the one, or the universe and the one. Uh, the Hen Kai Pan, the one and the all. And I think that gets at a lot of what I'm interested in. I'm going to put the link to join in the chat, and I'm also going to see if I can play the video. Sadly, my live streaming skills are very primitive. Yeah, like share a video. In fact, it might be better to wait until someone with more streaming knowledge than I joins, and then they can kind of walk me through how to share a video. But I have notes, and unfortunately they're not streaming notes. They're more like my own private notes. Um, when I read them, they do help me sort of focus on the sort of elusive topic that I'm trying to focus on. See, here I wrote, for example, God is whatever is beneath both spirit and matter. And so, okay, why am I even saying that? Actually, first of all, let me offer the disclaimer that I should offer when I'm using um, uh, Jacob Federecci's channel, as well as Almond Tree, which is that the views and opinions of Mr. Coolman do not necessarily reflect those of Jacob Federecci. In fact, I think in large measure they just don't. In particular, Federecci is an observant Jew, and he is against uh, idolatry, or what Judaism considers idolatry. That would include the doctrine of the Trinity, and also I don't know what all views, but I know that at least certain formulations of what you would call Zionism, Federicci also takes issue with. But I don't think I'm going to be referencing those as much as I might reference the Trinity. Even that, I mean, I have thoughts on the Trinity too, but I'm not sure that it's always useful to explain to even though I'm actually talking about a lot of the things that I think are involved in understanding the Trinity, and I do think it can be understood. Um, not you see in any kind of, not in some way where one understands all the intricacies and the depths, but the outlines certainly. I, but even though I'm going to be talking about a lot of what's involved in understanding the outlines of the Trinity, sometimes using that language just isn't helpful to people, because people assume it means different things, or it has to mean certain things, and you just get into religious tribal warfare.
So I don't know where Cal went. There you are. Hello, Cal. Oops.
Oh, hello.
How you doing? I
What
am.
is Sorry, my reception is bad. I'll try to get into the living room later if people clear out of there, but right now I'm stuck here.
Yeah, you lost reception for a second. I am gonna just change a few things. Thank you very much for the disclaimer. You only have to do that you um, if you're talking about the Trinity and Zionism, and I only do that because I wanted to keep a little bit of, oh, this is still my channel, um, I added a few whatchamacallits, a few more destinations,
Oh
so
wow, okay.
more people will show up,
Yeah.
and hopefully, and so if you go to the brand tab, so it was kind of funny to me that you were giving that disclaimer about Zionism, and you were using the Brit Olam tab.
Mm,
Uh,
mm, mm.
because Brit Olam is actually a Zionist organization that
Sure,
Chesney
sure.
is involved with, and I love Chesney despite the fact he's a Zionist. So you can use this one, and there are actually a few unused ones now, and you can make your own brand if you want. But we can talk about that later. I have to walk my dog. I will be listening intently, and then when I get back, I will try to jump on because I really love talking to
Wow,
you.
thank you so much. What a deep compliment.
And I love having you on my channel. So have fun, and I will be listening. I'll talk to you later.
Okay, thank you. Real quick, how do I
Yeah.
share something to the I want to play a
Oh,
YouTube
okay.
clip.
So, okay. So on the bottom, you see the present tab.
Yes,
Okay, click on that. And when
share
you click on
screen.
share screen, yeah, you usually want to use a Chrome tab.
Yeah,
Um,
and
the
I
only
can
thing I'll
do
say is do try to be um, um, careful about copyright, because now that my channel is big enough to be monetized, they're super checking all my stuff. And Luke, I love you. Um, I like listening to Cal talking because he makes sense. And my
Oh no.
my channel, I try very, very hard to increase the amount of sense making and reduce the amount of noise. And that's why, as much as I love you, Luke, and you're welcome on my channel, Cal gets an admin slot and you don't.
Well, let me serve as a something of a corpus callosum, if possible, between you two guys, because both of you guys make sense to me. I think that Luke is coming from an intuitive place. I mean, and even then, I like whenever Luke and friends talk about societal issues and like the big picture, like literary type stuff, that's to an extent also where I don't know if it's that I lose interest or that I don't understand, probably a little bit of both.
No,
But
it's honestly, I mean, that little corner of this little corner is filled with well-meaning, naive people,
mm,
and I can't stand the naivete. And it's like it's beautiful, and I grew up as somebody who was in fact um, very envious, I might say, of that naivete.
mm.
And because as a refugee from a shithole country coming to the United States, um, I I really envied the innocence. And have you listened to Michael Malice and Jordan Peterson talking? It was a few weeks ago. Looks like we lost Cal again. Well, um, my dog is going to murder me if I don't take her for a walk soon. Um, Cal? I don't think everything you say is gibberish, Luke. I think um, you don't apply the same rigor to um, when you talk about economics and politics um, in a world as you do in a world perspective as you do when you talk about um, when you're thinking about, for example, cooking or taking care of one of your apartments or even your own body. You use different parts of your brain, and um, while that's fine, and it's it doesn't, you don't have to um, you I mean you don't have to pay the same amount of attention that you do when you're cooking as you do. Cal is back. There's
Yeah.
Cal.
Yes, think this should resolve the issues hopefully because I'm right next to my router now or Wi-Fi box or whatever it is.
Um, Let me start walking my dog, and
Sure.
while I'm on the walk, I will see if I can join you. But my dog will murder me if I don't walk her.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I love Luke. I just wish Luke knew what he was talking about when he talked about economics and politics, which he doesn't, and he doesn't seem to care to actually care to know about these things. And if you haven't seen Michael Malice talking with Jordan Peterson, it's funny. Jordan Peterson is trying to push back at Michael Malice for what Michael Malice blocked me on Twitter for, which is telling him that anarchism just is silly, and it is. And but if you're interested in politics and you want to talk, no, it's not. It's not right. And we need both, yeah. But like every human being needs to use both sides of their brain when you're cooking. You don't just use your you don't just say, oh, I'm an intuitive person, right? Even though I'm guessing you're not a baker, Luke. And the difference between bakers and cooks is important. I'm guessing you don't bake, but even if you do bake, even if you when you're cooking, you're still using that spirit of geometry at least a little bit if you're cooking well.
I think Luke would say that you're doing geometry, but you're not having to bother to calculate. It's intuitive. It's there.
Um,
I was thinking about this the other day too when I was filling up my water filter. I was like, what do you call geometry when you don't have to think about it, but it's still geometry? Because
uh,
normally we think of busting out the calculations and
right. So things you are used. So this is what the left brain is good for in a single human being. It pays attention, and then it trains things to be intuitive so it doesn't have to pay attention anymore.
I like the apology for the left hemisphere that you're making here because I almost kind of felt Ian McGilchrist's one-sided, so to speak, um, support. Well, he was always, poo-pooing the left hemisphere and kind of putting the right hemisphere on a pedestal, which seemed like, in his own way of thinking, a very left hemisphere thing to do.
Well,
I
okay.
kind of,
So if you've read his book, The
I
Master and
haven't.
His Emissary, I don't recommend it. Um, it Although it is good, I still don't recommend it because I don't think he's the best representative of his own opinions. He spends immense amounts of time apologizing and being like, "I'm not saying what you think I'm saying." Um,
Interesting.
he's not saying that we could walk around with half our brains shut off. In
Hmm.
fact, he's saying the opposite. He's saying don't be it's all about the left brain. It's not all about the left brain. Um, Um, it's also, but I mean, losing sight of half of your brain is a bad thing. Okay, my dog will murder me. I will be back, hopefully, one day.
Okay, go ahead. You have my blessing to walk the canine. Now, um, let me see, Luke. You want to get on here and defend yourself against those allegations? The man insinuated that you don't understand politics and that you don't understand neuroscience. Actually, I don't think he was saying the latter, although he might not might not deny that you don't understand neuroscience either. So, but here's what I wanted to ask Jacob was, hey, Phlebas, you and I need to speak. I think you should get in here. You're the MVP in this stream. Let me plug the link back into the chat. Um, rolling out the red carpet for Phlebas. But what I was wondering when Jacob was talking about Michael Malice was, I'm wondering, and actually I have Google right here. Is he the host of Wretched? He's kind of a strange man. He's like almost like a self caricature. No, this is not the guy. Is this a Ukrainian guy? Then who's the host of Wretched? Wretched Radio. Oh, Todd Friel. That's right. I'm totally wrong. I'm totally off base. Well, Phlebas has a crew of apprentices here. Phlebas is a working man. He cannot be faulted for not jumping on the stream. He has actual improvements to make in the world. I'm going to play this video about Neoplatonism. Even though, see, now that I have a captive audience, I can just subject you to the unintelligibility of my notes. But I don't know. Maybe I'll just play this video. I'm sure it relates. I'm going to present. I'm going to share screen. I'm going to window. Yeah. What the heck? Entire screen? How come I can't just share? Also share system audio. Am I sharing now? Like I don't get it. Enter. Okay. Oh, it's canceled. See, I don't even understand. If I just do this, now I'm sharing screen again. Like I have no idea. Let me know if you can see my. Yeah, this is terrible. Yeah, I'm gonna wait for Jacob to get back in here. Let me see who all is in this chat. On previous streams, for whatever reason, was not really able to see the comments as they uh, were left. Phlebas, Sovereign Love, Jid Diox. I don't know who that person is. Well, anyway, this stream was supposed to be about the kinds of things that I always think about, which is like the God-world relationship, which in another way is like the relationship between logic and the absolute. I know that sounds a little bit Hegelian, and I've never read Hegel. Nonetheless, I've had thoughts that are so close to his that it makes no difference whether I've read him or not. Basically, the idea, for example, that Hegel believed that if you if you're doing logic correctly, logic being the art of avoiding contradiction, there you can see the way that it's almost interdefined with contradiction / the absolute, both X and not X. If you're doing logic correctly, then you're going to end up ultimately at a contradiction. And so, in some level, even though we do not allow for we never observe, and we do not allow in propositional logic for contradictions at the level of perceptual reality, like something is red and green all over. Schrodinger's cat is both alive and dead at the level of macro world perception. Nonetheless, there's this idea. Actually, I'm getting it from Chris Langan. I'm sure Hegel had a similar idea, or almost sure. Haven't read him. that beneath every distinction is an underlying unity in virtue of which the distinction may be drawn. Um, and that, so like if you have the principle of non-contradiction, either X or not X, you can ask something like, what is so generic as to be able to underlie you know a difference as stark as that between X and not X? And the answer is seemingly necessarily something uh, uh, in the nature of both X and not X. And so that's kind of where that's the ultimate contradiction that you arrive at if you carry a train of thought far enough. And so, when I was younger, I thought contradiction is sort of absolutely unallowable. Um, Makes me think of Parmenides saying, "What is, and what is not," and you can never get beyond this thought. Um, and now I'm more of the mind that it is allowable, even necessary, but at its level. It has to be there at the end, and then so there's a relationship between what I'll call the divided side of the divide and the undivided side. So there's the duality, let's say, of duality and non-duality, and one of these is more in the nature of the ultimate reality, being as it is at the bottom of the distinction between X and not X. And given that it's more ultimate, it's more fundamental, it's more so in the nature of the ultimate reality, where the ultimate reality is more so in the nature of unity. Hence why I think I called this stream the essence of reality is unity, because the mutual reality of real things consists in their interrelatedness. And again, they're being related, even as different terms, um, suggests the existence of some more fundamental medium. Like in the New Testament, there's the verse Acts 17:28, which is, I think, Paul's quotation of a Stoic philosopher, if I'm not mistaken, that in God we live and move and have our being. And so it's a weird thing where, from the perspective of division, there is a difference between duality and non-duality. But it's as if non-duality, for its part, the ultimate reality, when asked whether these two are the same, answers yes. So in other words, it's as if the division and distinction, I won't say they're an illusion, but I will say they're in the nature of secondary reality. Their mode of being is paradoxical because it consists in giving way. And yet at the same time, when we try to understand like the mode of being of the one, the perfect unity, it's hard to understand it in terms other than what we encounter here, in the world of light and shadow, and X or not X. So that's kind of like the beginning. Oh, Josh wants to join. He may certainly join. Hello. And
Hello.
so I have like incomprehensible notes about that. And I also have a video on Neoplatonism that I wanted to share, but I thought it's not letting me like easily share my screen. But
When
if I
you
could,
share your screen, it shows up on the bottom the same way that guests do, and you have to click on it to show, and then you have to change the layout using the buttons on the bottom of the screen.
okay, I have to change the layout using the buttons on the bottom of the screen. See on oh wait, maybe here or oh
So you see your screen, and then below it, there's some buttons for the layout, and then below that is the normal guest thing, which has like mic, cam, etc. But you have to change the layout. Here, I can change the layout a little bit, just so you see what it looks like to change the layout.
Like
Yeah, no,
here,
I'm
this is
I'm
yeah.
seeing those, but see, while the box that is giving you share screen options is up, I don't know how to access those other layouts, nor do I see my own. Well, I see my own
No, no,
screen
no,
here at
no.
the bottom,
First,
but
okay. First, you have to share the screen. Okay, what you
it's
hit?
not letting me share. I may not have sharing privileges. The share button is
No,
grayed
you
out.
definitely have the sharing privileges. So when it says present, click on
Yeah,
present,
yeah,
then click on share screen. Then you have
yeah,
to pick the tab
yeah,
that you want to choose,
yeah.
and then click OK.
There's no OK button. There's only cancel, and the share button is grayed out.
You have to pick a tab you want to share. Click on the
Okay.
tab you want. Click on the name of the tab you want to share.
Yes.
Okay, now the share button should be live.
I still no, it's not there. I mean, when I go back to the page, it's not. So I don't really know what to do.
Are you on a Mac
No, I'm on a Windows.
and you're using Chrome?
Yes.
I'm not sure what's wrong, but it's certainly not your permissions. You have full admin privileges.
Okay. Well, let me just see what I'll put the link to the video in the chat, and the starting point I want is 1845. If one of you got if you, whenever you get into this stream, Jacob, you can we remember
Well,
you can.
I'm on a phone. Josh could share his screen because everybody has
Yeah.
screen sharing privileges, but you would have to click and make that happen.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, let me see. Yeah, that video would have been more a little bit, what's the word? Accessible than the way that I tend to talk. Um uh part of how I do things is like I take refuge in obscurity. When I don't think anyone is watching, that's when I start entering into this kind of strange self-dialogue. Um and so anyway, here's like something I wrote here. Yeah, I get right into it. This stuff obviously gets controversial real fast. But so I'm exploring pantheism in this note, and I have the statement: if everything is God, then nothing is God. And I observe that a statement like that would only appear to be true for finite identifiers, that is, terms that are defined on their complement. If everything is God is nothing, then nothing is God, means that God is defined on its complement. But if God is defined on its complement, then that whatever that is or whatever it represents is not infinite, but God notionally is the infinite. And it's almost like as I'm doing my kind of amateur theology, the way to sort of define God is as whatever or whoever is infinite in every conceivable respect, which does lead to paradoxes because even that definition amounts to the placement of a limitation. And so it's inherently reflexive and sort of like it's like trying to jump over your shadow, or like what Hegel meant when he said that to know a limit as a limit is already to be beyond the limit. Um, uh, in trying to grasp the ungraspable, you will have, arrived at a statement which cannot um, represent God, um, with maximal accuracy.
Have you heard me talk about the recursive nature? Actually, we talked about the recursive nature of the ineffability of the tetragrammaton.
We have.
Right. So there's a reason why the tetragrammaton has to be ineffable, because it is recursively ineffable. I'm going to turn off my mic mostly because I think it probably is really loud in the background. People in the comments can say, but yeah. So, and I discussed this with Father Stephen DeYoung as well regarding the Trinity and hypostases, but he admitted, or I mean, I'm not sure he would use the word admitted, but for me, it seemed like an admission that even when they talk about the Father, that is itself also a hypostasis, which also means that that even
Yes.
the Father is not a se and truly God.
Right. It's a kind of like, the way I would look at that is like, if you have the finite and then some notional infinite, you have the true infinite that's underneath that you aren't grasping in the moment of thought. But what Hegel said something weird. He said like the thought of contradiction is the essential moment of the concept. It's like, in virtue of being able to have the thought, you're dimly aware that on the emergent edge of that thought is something more infinite than either. Because again, if every distinction presupposes an underlying unity, you have some more infinite that somehow both that even both that the finite and that notional infinite are both instantiations of, which is meaning to say that this finitude is an instantiation of the infinite. It's a for it's an infinite, and it's in its way as infinite as the notional infinite that you're defining it against. In the same way that a Honda Civic is as much a Honda as a Honda Accord. And so what I'm continually exploring is like, with what justification we may say that a given person is God. Um, I think Christianity, I would suspect the point of Christianity is to open the door to reflection on what it means for God to be incarnate in each person as each person, and sort of the ways in which judging another person ends up like, it looks like you're judging God. And it's a kind of like very serious level of religious reflection. It reminds me of like a story of like, there were two rabbis, and a crazy man kept coming into the rabbi's office, and he would ask for the radio to be turned on, and he would say, okay, so all the people and events they're talking about, these are all in reference to me. And the rabbi, whose office kept getting barged into, he would take the man very seriously. I mean, there's a way of humoring someone's delusions which can be malicious or mocking, but it's understood in the story that his taking the man seriously wasn't like that. He was just treating him with the maximum of dignity and seriousness. He wasn't blowing him off. And the other rabbi would always ask, whenever the guy finally left, why do you treat him like that? And he said, it's because I know that Hashem is standing right there. And so that's a favorite story of mine. And do we have someone at the door? Hold on.
So while Cal is dealing with that, Sandy says, what do you mean by ineffable? Ineffable means cannot be pronounced, right? And the Tetragrammaton is ineffable. It is the unpronounceable name of God. And it's not unpronounceable just as a matter of accident, right? We don't know how to say his name. It is ineffable because it needs to be so.
Yeah.
Hey, Josh, how you doing?
Hey, not too bad. So I wrote down. Well, you kind of. So is ultimate? We've. I think me and you have talked before about how our reality is perspectival, right? Meaning that like our perspective makes up our reality. Now, the ineffable that we're referencing is ultimate reality, that the perspective of the ineffable, meaning that like there is an ultimate reality that we're trying to perceive by getting in touch with this ineffable. And for me as a Christian, I would do that, or that would, Christ would be my my path to theosis, meaning that like that the more I become and participate in Christ, the more I'm allowed to perceive the reality, the more a peak and more peak away. Yeah, I guess become more and wrap my head, or I don't know how to, you know what I mean, to start to peak at that ultimate reality. Is anything I'm
I
saying
mean,
kind
I
of?
hear you.
Yeah.
I hear you, and it is a Christian thing to say. I think it's ultimately an idolatrous thing to say, and I'll explain why.
Okay.
So I was actually going to bring this up. So there's one of the names of God, which is rabbinic in origin. I mean, we don't have any explicit usage of this name in the Bible as referring to God, but the rabbis do uh, do find implicit references. And it's funny, now I'm thinking there's also a different word that's used the same way. And the first word is makom, which means place, right? And we refer to God as ha-makom, as the place, right? He is the place. He is the perspective, right? He's not a perspective. He's
He's
not
the.
a place,
Yeah.
right? And the second word, funny enough, is Anochi, which means I, right? And there are places, obviously, in the Bible where God uses the word I, and this gets a little bit into Buber's explanation of the Hasidic perspective of an I thought, I thou relationship as opposed to an I it relationship, right? A second person relationship with God, right? And to the degree that Christianity can be said to be talking about the importance of being able to have a theory of mind, right? To be able to love thy neighbor as thyself, right? So that you feel the empathy of being in someone else's place. Yeah, that's all good and beautiful until it becomes an absolutizing of any individual thing. I mean, I think I was listening to Luke and Grim Grizz, and there was a woman on the. I was listening. I wasn't watching. On the stream, and she talked about how she felt Christianity was limiting in that it set up Jesus as God, which meant that the ultimate perspective, and this is really how Islam fails, right? The ultimate man was Muhammad, who lived 1,300 years ago. And so you limit your perspective to one man at one time in one place, right? And that's ultimately the idolatry that Judaism rails against.
Can I ask, would Judaism consider it idolatry to say that every person is God instead of saying just one? Oh, I'm sorry, you're muted.
Oh, that's less idolatry than the idea that just Jesus is God, right? We are all gods, right? And it's funny. So in I believe John 10, I forget where it is in the
John
Gospel of
10:35.
John,
Yes.
of John 5, where it's quoting
John
Jesus.
10:35. Yeah.
Oh, okay. It is quoting Jesus, quoting the Psalms.
Yes.
Ani amarti Elohim etem. I have said, which is Psalms quoting God, right?
Yes.
I have said, right? So if you look at it, the recursiveness that it is, right? John is quoting Jesus, who's quoting God, who's quoting himself, right? Saying, you are gods,
Yes.
right? And that is part of our Bible, right? Elohim atem, b'nei elyon kulchem. You are sons of the Most High, all of you, right? And it's in the second person plural, kulchem. It's actually very emphatic language in the Hebrew, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
the sense in which we are all gods, in a sense, I mean, to understand that is to understand that because there's an infinite number of us, and it gets into the one and the many, and one of my bigger problems with the Trinity is that it collapses the one and the many into the one and the three. And the one and the three is a deficient incarnation of the one and the many.
Well, when I like my own understanding of the Trinity is just like what I laid out. You have if you have some notional finite and you have the notional infinite, and then you have the sort of emergent infinite that's underneath. And then I would say that all these three are one at that final level of logic where it leads to the absolute unity, where it leads or it ends at the level of ultimate reality in what you would call a contradiction. Both X and not X. So it's one at that level. But in the mind, a thought is what Chris Langan calls syndifionic. It's presupposing a unity in virtue of drawing a distinction. So in that sense, it has three elements. That's at least the way that I understand it. But
why those three elements? Why not a fourth?
Well, it's just, I mean, if you have a distinction between this and not this, so that's two.
Okay, but I mean, this is a discussion I had with Luke years ago when I had him on the panel, just the two of us, right? It's like it's convenient. Like I see how three, and like people who study memory, you know, they will tell you we like threes, and we do like threes, but there's no logical endpoint, and the Bible itself talks about the one and the many, right? One of my favorite verses: "The waters of the many cannot quench love." So I think, I think Christianity gets it more right than Greek philosophy and basic polytheism and paganism did before, but this goes back to two of my favorite verses to quote from the Greek Bible, which is, now we see through a glass darkly, and what Jesus says to the Samaritan woman, you worship what you do not know, we worship what we do know, for salvation is of the Jews. When Christianity comes back to its Judaism, and Bishop Barron's been talking about this, and when I went to the seminar that they had for Lord of Spirits, they had a convention, right? Like, I was sitting there listening to these priests and bishops, a bishop, talking about Judaism in a way that most not Orthodox rabbis would be ashamed to speak about, right? They were talking about the importance of actually understanding Judaism in order to understand Christianity. And I really don't mean to be offensive when I say this, but I don't think a Christian can understand Christianity as it was taught by certainly Jesus, and according to people like Father Stephen, like by Paul, without first understanding Judaism. And for most of its history, Christianity has called trying to understand Judaism as some sort of sin.
Can I if you don't mind my sort of walking it back to the topic of the God world or God man relationship. I want to ask questions about like what it makes sense to say of man and of God, and where God is sort of absolutely infinite or infinite in every conceivable respect. And one question I would want to ask is like, can we ever must we always say that each human being is God, but only in a sense? Or can we say that the infinite God is able to share divinity, even like a kind of consubstantiality or co-equality with all of his sons, and such that you can say each one of the sons of God, each one of those to whom the word of God came, is holy God? I'm wondering, or does that lead to what are sort of inadmissible paradoxes, or is that allowed by sort of the logical considerations of the nature of the infinite?
Once you're trying to like you're divorcing it from the Jewish context, which says, in any sense in which I say this man is God, is deficient.
Mm.
Right? So in context, like saying son of God, right? That you are, that we are godly, right? It is a wondrous thing to say, but it has a context of the Jewish Bible, which is that, oh, this fails, and it necessarily fails, and so it is a misunderstanding to be like, to say holy God, right? The Nicene Creed, true God from true God, and it's like, and now you're just missing it.
How does that miss it? Or yeah, I guess because I understand. I think I understand what you're saying in that, or like to understand the concept of God, that concept.
Oops.
Did I mute you?
No, that was God.
Oh no.
That was an act of God telling you
I'm
that Josh.
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get on Notepad. I might have clicked that button. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Gotcha. So, I mean, the concept that I inherited of God, that is a Judea is a, like, as I was raised in a Christian church, the concept of God that I had was wrong, and then eventually I've had to try to, build a different concept in my head. The concept that I have is most likely in line with Judaism. Is that what you're saying?
Okay, so I like to point this out.
Okay.
If you look at the Jewish temple, right?
Yep.
It's constructed very much like all the other temples, right? You have a building, and then you have a holy, and then you have a holy of holies, and then you have an ark, and on the ark you have the cherubs, and the cherubs are facing together to where you would have the idol of the god of that temple, and
Right.
there's nothing there, right? Everything points to an idol that's not there. It is an apophatic theology in actual, like, in an actual building, right? And that's beautiful, but you have to have the building pointing to the big space where there's nothing there. And what Christianity does is place Jesus there and destroy the building.
Exactly. Yeah, and so I see where you're saying that. So in your opinion, me worshiping Christ as God is idolatry. Is that where we're at?
Oh,
Okay.
100%.
Now, idolatry is paganism, correct?
Okay, I mean, now we're getting into the minutia of idolatry, paganism, and polytheism.
but I'm just saying that would paganism evolve, or Christianity as paganism evolved in a certain sense? Does that make sense? Or inverted? Sorry, inverted.
I think Christianity has leveled paganism up, and Christianity has fewer gods and a less bad idea of God than paganism did. It's an improvement on like what exists in Hinduism, let's say.
Yeah. Well, it consolidates it all down to the cross. I mean, and so, yeah. Like, I mean, if you want to say that I'm an idolater, I get that, but at the same time, this is, I guess you could say, yeah, no, I see where you're saying like the whole temple, there was not supposed to ever be anything there, and then Christ shows up and Christianity places him there. So it hijacks the Judaism, Judaism, and then places Christianity there. So you're seeing it as like a swap out, like this isn't. Yeah, okay, I see where you're at, but
it's a perversion, and it's a perversion that I think Jesus himself would have found like horrifying.
If you've known the Father, you know me. And there's nothing, and there's nothing where the Father is, so he places himself there, right?
He doesn't place himself there in a way that Judaism doesn't, right? We believe, like, the idea that human beings represent God in the world is not a Christian innovation. That's straight in the text of Genesis 1.
Right.
Do you guys... do I have your permission to walk it back to my earlier question?
No, you must. Yeah, of course you do, Cal.
Sorry, because I'm very linear in a certain way. Where
but I do want to hear what Sartori is here to say, because he rarely comes on.
That's true.
Well, it's just because it actually kind of worked out, and my computer worked. Usually, I'm catching up on like double speed, and then like by the time I'm ready to come on, the stream is over. So that's usually what happens. But I listen to a lot more of these. I mean, I'm terrible at leaving comments. But I mean, I think that, from my perspective, like I can understand these things that, the way that that the Christian worship of Jesus can appear as idolatry, or even it's absolutely possible that many Christians have incorrect perceptions of Jesus and do worship him in an idolatrous way. And I tend to think it's more when they discount his humanity to such a degree. But the point of the incarnation, or the question that it answers that otherwise has to be answered, is how with God being so ineffable and like
unknowable,
so he's unknowable. So how do we know him? What is
that's where I always get stuck.
Like, and then we say like, okay, well, we have these holy books or whatever. What makes those special? Or what, the story, or this, if you say the things that happened within those books, well, those are hotly contested historical issues. Or is it just that I guess the thing, the philosophical version of God where we can't ever know, the one we can't ever know, that's how do we know that that's a reality and not just a mental construct of something, like at least like it's like the materialist can say, here's the matter, I can hold it and touch it, like. And so I think because Christianity does not actually spread because of a philosophical teaching. It spreads through people and their behavior, and the counterintuitive way that they love their enemies, and like that's the explanation for why I'm here. Like this,
but it does philosophically take over. I mean, as what you're saying, as it spreads, the philosophies the philosophies overtake other philosophies, like such as what happened with Christianity. Like I originally looked into Stoicism, and then through that I'm like, well, my own Christianity goes farther than this. Like Stoicism only gets you so far.
Yeah.
And so it takes it farther. So yeah, sorry.
Right. Well, and I think that I think now we're bumping up against like the rigid propositionalism, which I think was necessary to accomplish some things, like the stuff that happened in like the Protestant Reformation. Like,
yep.
Like it's not necessarily that everything that's not in the Bible is not connected to God. It was more a thing of, what can we trust? We can trust this. This is the minimum thing that we can trust. And I think even like, in the Jewish concept of scripture and canonization, you start with Torah, you start with the 5 books of Moses, and then you see that Joshua and Judges and 1st and 2nd Samuel and the prophets, all those things, they build on it, they re-explain it, but there's no like, and now like here's some totally different thing, like no aliens show up or something. It's not like it's not like the Joseph Smith thing or whatever. It's like, I have a secret message from God that no one else has. Like, so
yeah. It's not some hidden knowledge thing.
Yeah. So there's like a way that it's an anchor that you can hold on to. And I think, now we've kind of, I think it's great that like real paganism, like the stuff that they were doing in Central America and on all that, but before we got here, I think it's great that we don't have religions that require 80,000 person human sacrifices. Like, that was a great thing. But now we're in an age where people are questioning these things, and I have no delusions about the fact that my understanding of everything is the correct one. I'm more or less trusting in the goodness of God and the grace of God to forgive me for my misunderstandings, and for that love to make up for my shortcomings. And that's even where being in this corner and stuff. It's like I can understand why like Jacob or like Sam has a problem with something like the Trinity, or like, even let's say like if you just think Jesus is a man, or if you don't, I don't necessarily think that's a thing that, like, God created people with the minds that they have and the limitations that their minds have and the way that their logic works. And, we have to more or less trust that he's aware of those things and he's going to do what's right. And ultimately his version of what is right is going to be better than our version of what is right. So,
well, and now we're kind of getting back to what we or I think where Cool Man started off with. Kale, is that his name? Or Cool Man?
Cal.
My name is ineffable. It cannot be. But I'm Cal Ribbit. I'm Kalia Ribbit.
Gotcha. Well, kind of.
And Cal he's getting married.
Oh.
In how many days?
2 days.
In 2 days.
Congratulations.
Which I have to say, like, all this thinky talky bullshit, it comes back to the marriage bed and having children.
Yep.
So, like, if he wasn't actually having children, I would just kick him off this channel.
Is it? And I'm tempted immediately to just walk it back to the thinky talky bullshit because of my singular obsession therewith. My obsessive.
I think there's a ton I can say, and there's a ton I wanted to say, but I want to leave this in Cal's hands. All I will say is, Michael, as far as I'm concerned, if you teach your daughters Hebrew, yeah, then we're talking the same talk, and I can agree with you 100%. But if you're not teaching your daughters Hebrew, then what you're saying is not actually a true faith and trust in that word which we're talking about. A deeper desire to actually understand what Jesus taught, right? As long as Christians are pointed towards Jesus in a love of who Jesus was, right? And they look at that crucifixion, like that picture that I have constantly that I'm showing, this one,
Mm-hmm.
right? As long as that's written in pseudo-Hebrew and it's illegible, it's a parody of who Jesus is. And it is illegible. Like, none of you can even see that that's not actually, like, that's an illegible fraud, right? You wouldn't know that from the actual Hebrew of Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. And that's what makes it a parody of who Jesus was. It's a satire. And that's what Christianity is a satire of worshiping Jesus. Because Jesus was a Jew.
Right.
Yeah. But, if God's truth is bound only in Hebrew, then, I mean, can't you, like, I think that there's a talk that I tried to share with someone, but there's a website where you can look at every, you type a verse in, and it will tell you, like, notes from the translators of every translation into every world translation that it's been in, and then it's translated back into English. And I think that translation expands knowledge. It does not there may be things that are missed when translating from Hebrew to English, but I don't think there's anything that's missed when you translate from Hebrew into every other spoken language in the world combined.
Okay, translation is like pornography. It can show you sex, but it can't show you sex.
It can show you sex, but it can't show you sex. Are you talking about it's a copy of like a copy of a copy or something like that?
It's a visual representation of sex. And that's
Okay,
that's what translation does. It describes sex. It describes a relationship with God. And while I perfectly understand that there are incels out there who will never actually know that, and I may be one of them, right, who will never actually know what it is like to be part of that marriage bed, right? Ultimately, there are some people who are lucky enough to actually read and digest the Bible in the language in which God gave it.
Can we get past? Can we not usurp that, or can we get over that hump? Okay, so basically, like, I'm illiterate to Hebrew. Like, I don't know any Hebrew. I don't speak it. I wouldn't be able to make out anything. I could take the time, but is there a workaround through the symbols, through the icons? Like, is there a workaround through that?
We all fail at knowing God, right? It's not
Right.
like just because I know Hebrew, I know God better than you do, right?
Okay,
That's not
what it kind of sounded like.
that's not
first.
true.
Okay.
But right, when you're trying to get at something, when you're trying to get at the ineffable, right, there are ways of walking in the wrong direction and walking in the right direction. And if you're learning Greek, and it's funny, I was very shocked when Father Stephen said this, but that this has also been my feeling from learning a little bit about the Septuagint and Koine Greek, right? When they say Koine Greek as opposed to classical Greek, what they mean is Jewish Greek. It is a Greek that is actually perverted by Hebraisms. And like he said, you can't understand Koine Greek without first knowing Hebrew.
Yeah, I think I remember where he said that, because he said that like nobody, like Koine Greek was like the scriptures are written in that, but like that there's no other. That's not. It's not a real thing. Like it's not a real thing. It wouldn't have been used a lot. Is that correct? Is that what he said?
Yeah, basically. So Koine Greek, so Koine means like vulgar,
Yeah,
merchant Greek,
like
and
slang or something like that.
it's it's obviously there. When you know Hebrew, you can tell that it's trying to get at the Hebrew in Greek, right? So, for example, in Hebrew, there are times when you use the prefix lamed, which means to, before the infinitive, right? So, this idea of designating an infinitive by saying to be, right? In English, we say to be. Where did that come from? That came from the fact that Koine Greek uses to and the infinitive, which isn't a Greek structure, and apparently it's not even an English structure, right? It became grammatical structure because in Hebrew, you do things like lirot, which is to and the infinitive, right? Sometimes, like when we were doing the Septuagint, the Greek Bible study, the translation is so wooden, right? It is so obviously an attempt to make it understandable. Like how sometimes when I translate from Hebrew to English, I do it in a way so that it's easy to translate back into the actual Hebrew, right? And that's what I call a wooden translation, right? Where I'm not actually trying to make it sound like in understandable English words. What I'm trying to do is give you a roadmap back to the Hebrew, and the
Well, that's just a
Septuagint Greek
witnessing.
is like that.
Well, is Koine Greek kind of like a witness to the Jews, like trying to say like this is our thought, and using words that you understand, I guess you could say, like a callback, like it's referencing back to things that you have in
Hey
your
guys, sorry not to interrupt or be too rude, but if I leave the stream, does it end? No?
No,
Okay.
even if all the admins leave, and I'm an admin, I don't know if Michael's still an admin, but even if all the admins leave, it will continue going for like 5 minutes, even if everybody leaves. But if as long as there are people, it doesn't end by itself.
Gotcha. Okay, because at this point, because I don't have that much time,
Okay.
I'm wondering if I need to actually start myself a different stream, and you guys can continue this conversation.
No,
But
we're here because of you, Cal. You're
okay,
going to take it over.
okay.
I'll,
So because I asked this question, um, whether we can say of a given man that he is holy God, which obviously sounds ridiculous, and I don't fully remember your response at this point, but the response sounds to me like it always has to be in the nature of a qualification. So this man is like God in some respect, we might say, which is interesting already, because where God is he who is essentially he who is infinite in every respect, to be infinite but in only some respect is just to, in the end, well, fail to be God. And so, which is, I mean, you can say that when it comes to God and man, God has attributes of immanence and transcendence, right? He's in everything and everyone, but he's also transcendent. And the question is, so I guess I should have backed up to here. The the um the degree to which this principle is properly axiomatic, or whether that should be debated. But, and again, I don't know if it's totally original to Chris Langan, but I learned it from him. The syndifionesis principle that says every time you have a distinction, it's presupposing some deeper unity in virtue of which the distinction may be drawn. And he takes that as an analytic or logically necessary truth. And if that needs to be litigated, then I'm willing to get into that territory. I'm not sure I fully understand it either, but I think I understand why Langan says that, and I think I agree. But
Say what he says one more time, please.
The principle he calls syndiphionisis is just saying that every time you are able to draw a distinction, that's presupposing some more fundamental unity or identity that exists at a more generic level of conceptual structure. And so if we take that on board, see, then it informs my response to the question of whether God's transcendence can ever be his final attribute, or put another way, whether distinction or division can be the ultimate reality. Because it seems to me that where we have man over here and God over there, whatever unity is presupposed by that is more fundamental than either, and also makes each one, God and man, a type of that unity and equally a type thereof. And now I understand what it's possible to do is almost like rotate the diagram and say that, specificity on the one hand and genericity on the other, they're distinct. But what I keep returning to is this question of where non-duality is the ultimate reality. In a sense, that's a one-valued logic that only answers yes. And so it's like, from that perspective, the likeness, even between genericity and specificity, is always found. The answer to the question of same is always yes, because it's always recognizing the way that to even see the difference is positing a more fundamental unity. So to me, what it's leading to is it's a profoundly crazy and paradoxical idea that every reality is equally and in all respects God, that God is the only reality. And though we perceive difference, and though we perceive that, in this moment, I'm having a finite experience of these, finite and delimited identities, that in some crazy way, the true nature of my experience is somehow an unmediated experience of the infinite. Like, well, anyway, I think that's enough for a response, so that we can, go back and forth on.
So, two things. One, I think the reflexive nature of the ineffability of the tetragram really answers what you're talking about in terms of generality and specificity. It is a reflexive admission that I don't know. And yes, this is something that is beyond my knowledge. And second, I think the orientation which we have to have in the world, and why Jordan Peterson and this little corner came into being, is a refutation of what seems to be a postmodernist, subjectivist idea that everything is equally God, right? Sur merava asetov, flee from evil and do good. And that's why Sam Harris is like, well, I want to leave evil, right? Because you have to have an orientation in the world. And if you don't have an orientation of this is better than X is better than Y, that there is a good to which I am oriented and an evil I am oriented against, then you lose all life. And this is fundamental to the Jewish Hebrew sculpture of the Bible, right? I call upon the heavens and earth as witnesses to you today that I have set before you good and evil, life and death, and that I command you to choose life, right? And so this concept of everything being equally godly, right? Every man being equally godly. Yes. That's a complete failure of orientation towards the holy.
And that's good, because what I'm saying, the way that I'm saying it, it should be outrageously controversial, and if it's not, then I'm not articulating it successfully. And B, there's a way that I want to defend it, which is like it's this episode from the Mahabharata, which is a Hindu epic that I grew up with some understanding of. And it's an interesting story, if I can just digress here briefly for my illustration to make sense. There is a figure in the Mahabharata named Krishna who, like Jesus, is, or at least the Catholic understanding thereof, is God incarnate, and the Mahabharata is about an intradynastic war. So you have two groups of cousins basically, and one of them is a little bit more God-fearing than the other, and they know that Krishna is God. And so the leader of each group of cousins, they race to Krishna's bed, and one of them goes to Krishna's head and the other one goes to his feet. And Krishna gives them the option: one of you can have me in your armies, but in a non-fighting capacity, and the other of you can have my armies, because he's himself the head of some dynasty. And so the non-God-fearing cousins, the Kauravas, they choose to have the armies naturally, and then the God-fearing ones are like, we'll have you even in a non-fighting capacity. So anyway, the battle happens, and then the one who's called the grandsire of the Kuru dynasty, Bhishma, he's just out there on the battlefield. He's just messing stuff up really bad. And Krishna loses his temper. He gets angry, and he's like, you're going to cause my side to lose. So Krishna is one of the Pandavas, the good cousins. He's one of the Pandavas' chariot driver. And Bhishma shoots that chariot all up with his magical arrows, and it doesn't work anymore. So Krishna jumps out. He picks up a chariot wheel, and he's going to basically beat Bhishma down with it. And when Bhishma sees that, he drops his weapons and he smiles in anticipation, because he knows that as good an outcome as it might be to win on the battlefield, it is an even better outcome to die at the hands of God himself. And so there's a way that when I say this outrageous thing, when I defend it, I want to defend it in the manner of Bhishma dropping his weapons. I want to hear all the best objections against it, because now I'm hearing the importance of having some kind of identifiable moral good. You have to love good and hate evil. So there's a light and there's a darkness that you're eschewing in favor of the light. And I guess what I would say is, the first thing that I want to say is that when we say that all identities are one, or when we there's increasingly, it seems to me that to say that all identities are ultimately one is just what it means to say that God exists. So whenever I equate anyone with God, it's at that level where all things are equated with God. So in other words, in any given situation, let's say, it's not so much that any one item therein is God, but that the situation as a whole is God, and that the item therein is not understood ultimately apart from sort of the widest perspective one may take of its context. That perspective, which in some sense exhausts your consciousness, and so that when there is me in the act of making a judgment, like this seems like it's good, i.e., it seems like it's in the image of God, that ideal integration, both X and not X, in virtue of which all desirable things seem desirable to me. And if you want, I'll make a digression about that just to explain my sort of axiology here. But it seems to me that everything we consider good / desirable to the extent that it images the infinite. In that sense, it's an image of the invisible. It is good insofar as it represents the overcoming of some limit. And so whatever seems good to us, it's good because it's overcoming some limit. And that's also why whatever's good or attracts our eye is so often also novel, and whatever is not novel is not desirable and does not image the infinite. So there's me in the act of making that judgment, and increasingly it seems to me that's God in me recognizing God's self in that judgment. And so but the thing is, whenever but this is the savage heretical implication of what I'm saying. The wicked man in choosing evil, that's God recognizing himself in that judgment. It's in a sense, whatever a person purposes to do is their highest conception of the good. Otherwise, they wouldn't be choosing to do it, and that's a bit of decision theory or sort of axiology that I'll explain it. But basically, the idea is, unless the reason why someone chooses one of two alternatives is that that's for them the greatest good, at least for them, that they can realize in that instance, we have no way of explaining why they choose one thing or another. And so basically, I think that's enough on the table for a response. Let me know if I need to sharpen it, but I'm acknowledging the severely insane and heretical nature of what I'm saying.
Okay. So I have to include a preface here, which is there are things in Judaism which we do not teach publicly. We teach. We did not teach publicly until 500 years ago at all, and it has become necessary to start teaching, despite the fact that we realize probably the majority of people who would hear it will misunderstand it. And if the majority of people who hear it will misunderstand it, then it's better not to talk about it at all, because you're only increasing confusion, right? Cool. So I talk about the scriptures being arithmetic and Talmud being algebra and Kabbalistic concepts being calculus. And there are people who believe that once you learn calculus, it will tell you that 2 + 2 no longer equals 4. And I have to say 2 + 2 = 4. And anything that I am going to talk about in this vein is presented on the fundamental that 2 + 2 = 4. And what is taught in scripture is fundamentally true. And what we're trying to understand are things within the scripture, not outside of the bounds of which scripture teaches. 2 + 2 = 4. The 10 Commandments are the 10 Commandments. And the simple understanding of the Bible is the simple understanding of the Bible. But for those who are asking a deeper question, like you are, one of the greatest theological discussions in the past 300 years of Judaism has been the understanding of Tzimtzum Kepshuto, which is, Tzimtzum talks about the constriction of God that is necessary for the world to exist. And Hasidic philosophy versus what is now called Lithuanian philosophy was once called Mitnagdim or Misnagdim, which is the opponents of Hasidism, right? They were trying to understand how it can be that a God in a sense withdraws himself from the world in order for us to exist, in some way appearing as if we are not God, because God in being infinite, right, obliterates all things that is not God. And so the explanation which I espouse as somebody who is a student of the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who wrote Tanya, which anybody interested in these concepts, I mean, that's where we get into. I have a weekly series with Ben where we get into Tanya. And the analogy that's made is God as infinite light. And it just happens that this analogy works, and please don't take the analogy too far, but the Kabbalists talk about two types of light. They talk about the light Sovev Kol Almin, the light that goes through and is beyond all the worlds, and the light Mamala Kol Almin, that which pervades and interacts with all the worlds. And the analogy can be made to a background radiation which is omnipresent, and it doesn't interact with the material at all, right? So it goes right through us, and it doesn't in any way affect us, and it's always there. And then there's the light, which is like visible light, which bounces off and shows and heats up, right?
Mm.
So that distinction, God is both Sovev Kol Almin and Mamala Kol Almin. God fills all the worlds, and he also is beyond all the worlds. And so in those two aspects, I mean, these are contradictory things, but they are, God is both at the same time. And to the degree that we see a difference in the holiness of any object, right? So I would say a human being is obviously more in the image of God, reflects God more clearly than my dog does. And I think that's clear. That is from an aspect of Mamala Alman. That is from an aspect in which God is revealing himself. And when God isn't revealing himself, then it isn't
Oh, hello? What? Oh, okay. Lost him.
He's
hey.
going back to.
There he is.
Back up slightly. We lost you.
Okay, I was talking about God being present in my dog and in me. And is God present in my dog? In a way, yes. Is he present in me? Yes. And in some ways, because a dog does not have the capacity to sin that a human being does, he's more present in my dog or in a rock than he is in me. Sorry, I'm getting water for my dog. Did any of that make any sense?
Yeah, it was making
It
sense.
does. I just have many responses. Was Chad coming in? Oh, no. Or is that me on an echo?
I don't know.
Or is that Mike? Well, so when Hezi brought up the Simpson, I just again brought it back to the Sindifionis principle, which again maybe that's what we need to put under the microscope or question or litigate it. But if you have the notion of, and I understand the Simpson is a way into a paradoxical concept. I'm not like, Cal destroys the Simpson with facts and logic right now. I like that idea a lot. So you have God withdrawing, so that there can be room for something other than God, so to speak. But then the Sindifionic question, if you like, is underneath the place where God is not, so to speak, and the place where he is, so to speak. What's more fundamental, and so, or like what's underlying it in virtue, so that the distinction can be drawn. You mentioned the two kinds of light, and that to my mind it does map onto what I asked or observed earlier about which of God's attributes, his transcendence or his immanence, has greater fundamentality. While you were making your points, I wrote, in which mode is God, the ultimate reality, more ultimate or fundamental, i.e., in which mode is he more God? In which mode is he God as such? And it seems to me the immanent is, that in virtue of which the distinction is drawn is by its nature more fundamental, more ultimate, and more ultimately apposite to the nature of ultimate reality. Finally, the notion is, it seems problematic. I'm not just going to inherently swat it down, because again, I'm trying to defend myself in the manner of Bijma dropping his weapons. If I'm wrong, I want to be corrected. But it seems problematic to say that the infinite God can be less present in anything, which does again lead to this implication that is seemingly one would say non-Copernican, humanity no longer at the center of everything, but really more properly, it's to try to say that from the gaze of the infinite, everyone and everything is the center, and to say that the infinite is of such a nature that gaze is possible for him. But so I'll let you respond to that.
Well,
you're on mute. I'm sorry.
So I'll say, we say that, in fact, the aspect of Sovev, that which transcends all world, is actually more fundamental.
Indeed. Yeah,
And
that's what I suspected.
right, and but the point of creation is that, in fact, we will eventually have, and I mean, this really gets into deep stuff that I've been talking with Ben about. So the Rebbe, the final leader of Chabad Hasidus, him, he his first speech that he gave, his inaugural speech, which was basically the motto of his entire reign, 50-year reign as the leader of Chabad, and basically one of the greatest Hasidic leaders to ever live, was so in the Song of Songs, it says, "I have come into my garden." And he explains that is the fundamental reason for creation, is for God to come into his garden, to come into where he essentially always was, but a return to his garden. And this aspect of the greatness of the light is from the darkness. A person who has never experienced darkness doesn't recognize the greatness of the light. It is, and the verse, I believe, is from Ecclesiastes. Ra'iti yitron ha'or min ha'choshech ke yitron ha'chokma min ha'sichlut ke yitron ha'or min ha'choshech. I saw that the greatness of wisdom over folly is as the greatness of light from the darkness. And the Hasidic understanding of that is that the greatness of the light comes from having experienced the darkness.
Right.
And so God withdraws,
Yes.
but that withdrawal is in a sense a lie, and is a veil which covers up the truth, which is he was never gone to begin with.
Right. So it's like what I said earlier, like an essential duality of duality and non-duality, or with Chokmah and Bina, being and becoming, right? So that, like, we start on a road of logic, and it's like the idea is that if identities are discriminable from each other, that has certain implications, or that in order for words to have meaning, they have to be sort of on their complement. The Syn Diffionesis principle of Chris Langan is basically saying that if X is defined on its complement, such that what X is upon investigation is not X, that implies that there's a union of X and not X that's underneath both, and that's for him is the analytic immediacy of the Syn Diffionesis principle. And so what it is suggesting is that the ultimate reality is unity, or that we are kind of aspiring to a condition in which words will no longer require a complement, or experiences will, in a sense, no longer require a contrastive condition in order to have meaning. This is a sort of a provisional starting place, which also, in a way that I find hard to articulate it, at least right now, it also does seem to require a certain, it does seem to have a certain necessity, like to your point. So this is kind of an interesting place to camp out.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately you're reaching to a place of no man can see my face and live. Right? There. So I've done this several times. There's an explanation of there's a story in the Bible. Moses asks God he wants to see God's face, and God says, and this is right after where it says, "I speak to Moses face to face."
Yes.
And God says, no man can see my face and live, but I will allow you to see me from behind. And it says God puts him into a rock and passes by him, and Moses sees God from the back, right? And the Midrash says, what did Moses see? He saw the back of God's phylacteries. What are phylacteries? They're these leather boxes with scripture in them that Jewish males wear, and it's actually mentioned in the Christian Bible. And one box is between your eyes, right on your forehead, and one box is on your arm. And so the Midrash is saying that Moses saw that tie which keeps the box of scripture between your eyes. Okay? Now, that form of tying is something external to our understanding, right? Like, you don't understand scripture by tying it to your forehead, right? That is a very external way of seeing things, right? To physically tie a bit of scripture to your forehead, right? And that knot, right? That knot that, in a sense, keeps scripture tied to God's forehead, whatever that means, right? Is the only way in which we can see God.
But
yeah,
it seems to me that in light of that, and again, I mean, just taking the Syn Diffionesis principle for what it's worth, because you said earlier that the transcendence of God is his more ultimate attribute, and it's, in a way, it's like saying that distinction can be the ultimate reality. But in light of everything we just talked about, or again that Syn Diffionesis principle, it seems like the unity has to be the ultimate reality. And again, the name of the stream, the essence of reality is unity.
Well,
And
I mean,
that's kind of the continual focus that I am. That's why I'm always that's why I'm always absorbed by this question of the sort of infinite indwelling of God in every person. Like in the scripture, I'm increasingly just coming to think that everything it says of Jesus Christ, it can say of each of us, that in each of us, the fullness of the Godhead dwells bodily.
but I think Chad actually makes the best point when he says, "Isn't that consummation coming into the garden?"
Is it something that we should see as necessarily to be awaited as opposed to an imminent and immediate reality? At least to the
Look,
best of one's ability.
ultimately, I have to go back to you're getting married in 2 days and you have a baby, right? And it's nice to talk about the romantic theological idea of being that newlywed, right? The virginal bride and the virginal bridegroom, but ultimately it has to be about having the babies.
Yeah, we have to have a
Really good points. Let me take a time out. I'll come right back.
Symbolism only for married people, where we can talk about.
And I have to say, Chad, like your comment was right on point.
So,
Yeah, well, I thought you mean that because that made me. I keep thinking of it as like, yeah, it's the story of Adam and Eve, you know, and the kind of because the question is, you can always think of like a, you know, you can have an infinite regression backwards of like causes, and at some point I guess you know you ultimately do end up with like that agent arena distinction. Either you have a universe creating people in it, or you have a personal creator creating a universe or something. They say who created that, and you kind of can go back, you keep going back. So at some point, like God, that's the difficult thing is to figure out like what's the distinction between creator and creation, and if there is one. And I think about it, so like here I am in my workshop and I can create things in here or whatever, but it requires that I have that space to do it. It requires me to be in this area. There is another way that I can create without this space, which is in my imagination. But if I imagine something, it's imaginary or whatever, or we don't. It's not equal to the thing that's real. And the ultimate thing is when you imagine something first, and then it comes to fruition, and you really make the thing. And then because then not only can you could always enjoy your imagination, it's like I could write a book in my head. If I never write the book down and share it with anybody, it's just a book only I can enjoy. If I put it out, other people can enjoy it. And I think, so that's kind of the question, because if everything is always, the question is more or less, can God create something external to himself, I guess you could say. And I think like that's what you see in the pattern of creation where, like, why doesn't he just make Eve out of the dirt like he made Adam out of the dirt? He makes Eve out of Adam, and then like Adam
together, right?
Well, then then they're joined together, so then there is that consummation. And you think about it, it's like, and maybe this gets to Jacob's point, like what is before Adam can have his wife? What does he have to do? He has to explore every other part of creation. He has to explore the garden and see all the other animals. And when he sees all the sum of all the other things, he sees similarities between all of them, but they're not quite the same. And in some way, he has an imagination. Okay, my because he sees all these animals, male and female, and he sees the trees, male and female, and he, all the different things, however much he explores, and then he can say, I'm like this thing in this way, but it's not equal to me or whatever. And then ultimately, when God puts him to sleep, creates him, he sees Eve. He knows that he is seeing himself in his corresponding form because he's explored everything else there is. So I think, and maybe this is even to say, like, idolatry, we're so prone to it or whatever. And there is the thing of like, yeah, it's never God. It's like whatever we're saying is God, maybe like that's not God himself. But what are we like? Then if it's not God, what is it? If it's not the creator, then it must be part of creation. Like once all of creation is explored, then it's actually explored and known to be separate from God himself. Then that is a consummation. Then God has his bride, as we, in the wedding imagery of like, of Revelation and all this thing. So,
You're
that's
trying to say that in that case, then God is wholly present in the identity under consideration.
I like so. I mean,
That's what I would try to steer it toward. But
well, yeah. I mean, it's like, where was Eve before she was standing next to Adam? She was like with well, in a way, yeah. She was within him or whatever. Yeah, she was within him, and Adam was within the dirt, and the dirt was within the watery chaos, and that was, in the mind of God. And so, I mean, I don't know, because I kind of see, like, in a sense, because time is a created thing. At some point, like, God desired the ultimate eschatological vision, and it just came into being instantly, and we are just only able to experience it through the linear progression of time, which is kind of like why, like, if John sees a vision of the new heavens and the new earth, like, he's seeing a vision of something that already exists. It just doesn't exist from our perspective right now. But
well, it's like what you said about your book, and now your book example is that, like, you can write an entire book inside of your head, but until you put pencil to paper, it's not going to be shared with anything. So Eve was always in God's head, like Chad said, in his imagination, but she came into reality when she, so she always existed. Like Christ said, I knit you together, I think it says, it says of God, like, I knit you together in your mother's womb, and that we've always existed. It's just now we're getting drawn out, or we're getting written out, and we're experiencing that through time. I mean, so my book is our,
yes, we see it.
You see all of these turkey out there?
Nice.
So
you got the turkeys.
There's like 10 of them out there, and then like 5 squirrels. There's over there to the left, there's a cardinal. This is crazy. That's insane. Anyways, this idea of the book, you write the book in your head, and then it's not it has no effect on the world unless you write it. I think that that's actually not true. I think once you invoke the imagination, it will immediately have an effect on the world. And that depends on whether you write it, or let's say if you're struggling with writing it down, that will play out in all sorts of ways in the world that are probably equal to more like maybe not so good, maybe so, I'm not sure, but I think that the fundamental reality of or the reality is fundamentally imagination. And imagination is such a terrible word to describe this, because we have such a bad relationship with imagination, like we have become unenchanted even with or disenchanted with even imagination. So it's like, a mystery.
Oh no, it is a mystery. It was a mystery. Well, I always think it too is the thing about imagination, and like it does have an effect, but like like what can I say? The thing that I actually do is like the most centrally real. It doesn't mean the thing that I only imagine is not real in a way as well. Like, but then that's where you get into like distinction and stuff, because it's like, we can imagine the world where Eve didn't eat the fruit, or the world where Cain didn't kill Abel, and like God can imagine that too. And is that world real in some sense? Because it made me think of a sense. This is what I kind of shared this idea with Cal a long time ago, but like because one of the big draws toward like a universalist thing is, well, we don't want like the loved ones the people that I love, but if they reject God, if we say that's whatever, their choice puts them in heaven or hell. Well, maybe there's another reality where they made the right choice, and so they are there. When I get to heaven, they're all there, but they, their history or whatever is a life where they did things different than in the shared history that we had together. So
I kind of had a thought while you were talking. So we were talking. Let me see if I can retrace my thinking. So we were talking about being a thought of God, and how that like Eve was not in reality until He brought her in. But something that's not real that has an effect, and they're always laying in wait, is like spirits. So like I didn't actually go out and murder my brother, but I hated him in my heart. And so like that's going to have an effect on me, which is again, eventually if I feed it enough, it'll have an effect on the world. And so like and to Kale's point, like Kale was, I think what you're talking about, Kale, is that like how, like, is God tied to the lack of light in the same way? Is He as present in the darkness as He is in the light? Is that what you're kind of saying? In that like God, if God is everywhere, God is everything, then he's in he's in the unreal as He is in the real.
Well, that is, as far as the consideration of like reality and imagination, like act and potential, that's a different sort of discussion, because it's actually circling around many of the same things that, well, I mean, look, if someone were a smarter philosopher than I, and had better thought these things through, they would be able to show you the integration of what you just said right away. I mean, for me, if like I can talk about when we talk, for me, like right now at my level of understanding, the discussion of the relationship between act and potency is going to circle around many of the things that Jacob and I were just talking about, but in a sort of different way. That's it's a discussion I want to say for another time, because I was about to ask Jacob, is the ability to end the stream in any way dependent on my being here, or you can end the stream when I'm gone?
I can end the stream.
Okay, beautiful. All right, so yeah, I'm gonna have to head out, and I'll listen to you guys on the stream as I'm doing my chores and such. But thank you very much for your time today, gentlemen. Thank you for always letting me on your channel, Jacob. And thank you, Josh and Michael, for joining and for humoring me as I was so doggedly perseverating on my my fixations. All right, so thank you.
Congratulations on the wedding. Give our best to your wife.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you so much.
And then you can come for the married only symbolism stream that we'll have.
Oh, okay.
Right. That we'll have on Jacob's channel, and Jacob won't be able to join.
No, we could just have it on my channel, and 6 people will see it.
Okay.
That
or
sounds.
whatever.
I don't know what to think about that. It almost sounds like a Russell style paradox, like you're the barber who shaves all the barbers who can't shave themselves or don't. So anyway, but all right, I'll see you guys later. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Hey,
funny. I'm teaching a parenting class, and it's like my friends were making fun of me for that.
hey, before or I wanted to. I had been listening to Kale there for a long time, and you and him go back and forth. And I was trying to follow as best as my understanding would allow. But at some point during the conversation, I thought that I had a comment, but it kind of, the conversation moved on. But is the allegory of the cave at all, or Plato's allegory of the cave at all applicable to what he was talking about in that, meaning that there's a false light inside the cave? Is that at all related to the true light that the man finds when he goes outside of the cave? I mean, was that kind of what he was talking about as far as like God is present in the, I guess, in some of the false light as much as in the true light? Is that what he was trying to say?
I mean, there is. I think there definitely is some of that there. I'm
Okay.
very, very hesitant, like when we talk about this, not to constantly say what we're not saying is that good and evil are the same thing.
Yes. Yeah. No,
Right.
and yeah, because as far as I understand it, that would be like a bad thought that God wants, that he wants out of his head. He's going to expel it. He's going to burn. He's going to. It is like, because it's not like as if God can't conceive of evil. It's that he refuses. He separate. He in no way can be present inside of it. But it's not that it's as if like there's no ability to conceive of it. It's because if he wasn't able to conceive of it, he wouldn't know what it was, and that's not God. And so, like, I mean, so yeah, he doesn't. He's in no way participatory or in no way present there. So, like, you're right that we could never say that good and evil are the same thing, but I don't know. In my mind, it would seem like if we're using the thought that we're all thoughts inside of God's head until we come into reality, and then we're like a book being written. That possibly has already been written, and we're just reading along with it as the observer, or something like that. That evil is unacceptable thought that God wants expelled from His reality.
Well, okay, I'm going to have to disagree with that. So
Okay.
you are going according to what I would say is the Greek and possibly how most Christians understand evil, which is an absence of God,
Mm-hmm.
which I would say is refuted by the Bible explicitly.
Where at would you say? Just so I know.
God says, "I am the Lord; I create evil." Isaiah 45:7. Here, I'll pull it up.
Yeah. Because this is helpful to me in some of my ponderings as well.
So Isaiah 45 is actually very fundamental to Jewish theology, the entire thing. But so 45:5. I am the Lord, and there is no other beside me. There is no God. I will gird you, and you, though you have not known me, so that you will know that from the rising of the sun to its setting, there is nothing other than me. I am the Lord. There is no other. I form light and create darkness. I make peace and I create. And this word here is the exact same word as in the. They translate it as calamity, and all the Christian translations try to twist it to their theology, but the word there is precisely the same word as the tree of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil or bad, or however you want to put it. This is that word. I am the Lord who makes all of these things. And so it's not so. The Jewish understanding is Kol Rahmana Avid L'Tav Avid. Everything that the Merciful has created, He has created for the good. That does not mean everything is good. And the example I like to give is children's hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
What do you call a place where you take a little child to strap them down, make them bleed, make them cry, cut into them, poison their body, make their hair fall out, right? You call it a children's hospital. And so I hate children's hospitals. Children's hospitals are evil and bad things that should never exist. Except I also give money to children's hospitals because children's hospitals are beautiful things that God has created and allow us to keep little children alive, right? And just as when, as a father, you may hold your child while a doctor sticks a needle into your child,
I had
right?
that experience yesterday. My daughter's getting her immunization.
You do it, right? And this pains you greatly,
Yep.
right? But you still do it. That is how I would say is a Jewish view of evil, is that it
So is
every
evil a tool of God?
yes.
Okay, that's what I was.
It,
So he reaches into the darkness with tools. I mean, is that a okay way to say that?
he creates the darkness as a tool.
Yeah, and so the darkness that's present in our lives will drive us towards his light.
Correct.
So the false light drives us towards the real light. In the cave analogy of it, and that so we I need to think over that for a second. Michael, you were going to say something.
Well, it's like, so I think, like, so I'm in this shop here, and literally everything that I use when I make anything, every one of these is a blade or a pokey thing or a smashy thing that is all just designed to destroy the fibers of the wood.
The pieces of the thing you don't want, because the table is in the wood. You just haven't constructed it yet.
Right, and so like there's always a cost to creation, and I think maybe this is the thing, where like when Christians say like, and creation ex nihilo, like out of nothing, that's like, okay, but then what is nothing? It's the no thing. What else is the no thing? God is no thing. So it's still coming out of God. So creation has to have some kind of a destructive, that's the only way you make anything. And I think that when is Josh not here? I don't know. Well,
he's probably listening. I turn off my camera when I have to go like zap my oatmeal because I'm really hungry.
Yeah. Well, I think, that's when David says in Psalm 51, against you and you only have I sinned. Like, I think that he's understanding that, like, yes, he sinned against Bathsheba and he sinned against Uriah, but ultimately God is the one who bears all the cost of those sins because he created us and, we're his children. And, because like, if my children hurt each other, that does hurt me, and I don't enjoy having to discipline them to teach them not to do that. And, I come to the point of thinking like, okay, so if you were just to have the world be a simulation and you simulate all the possible worlds, and this is what I think, like, what's the philosopher Leibniz that said, like, this is the best of all possible worlds. I think it might actually be the worst of all possible worlds. Or I think if God imagined all the possible worlds, like, whatever, he could have made people more obedient and there would have been less pain or whatever, but that's not what he chose. He made this world with difficult people. And if you looked at the whole thing from creation to the end of time, and you took the one person who had the most difficult life and the most suffering unjustly, and then God says, I'll take that person's spot. And then in comparison, that person can forgive the other people for the wrongs done. If that person can forgive the wrongs done against him, then ultimately everybody could be forgiven, because
Yeah, you're getting into things I'm just going to disagree with.
well, you can just disagree with him, but I mean, I would say like in a like
God is not contingent. The world God created is the best possible world and the worst possible world, because God, that is all God can do, right? God is ultimately good. He does things in the best way possible, in a way that is hard for us to comprehend and acknowledge. And at some point, you have to go back to the book of Job and hear God say, to be vulgar, who the F are you? Which is basically what he says to Job.
Yeah.
Right.
I think he says this in light of the one who ultimately suffers more than Job. So
why? What does that have to do with anything?
Because you can't. Well, because it's like the Peterson thing of, if you can't imagine yourself, like if you can't imagine yourself being the Nazi guard, you're going to be the Nazi guard.
What did God experience in the incarnation that he did not know before?
Nothing. But
exactly. So
but
what's
it was
the point of it?
The necessary condition of creation being real and not just
No.
imaginary.
No, because God is the realness. God cannot be God. Even if Tolkien wrote himself into the Lord of the Rings, he would never be contained in the Lord of the Rings. And to pretend that Tolkien writing himself into the, like, Brothers Karamazov, right? Fyodor Dostoevsky wrote himself into that book in many, many ways over and over again, including the fact that all of the kids, like the father of all the kids, is Fyodor Fyodorovich, and all of the kids are, whatever Fyodorovich, right? So he wrote that book is an autobiography in many, many ways, but ultimately you cannot point to the Brothers Karamazov and say that is God, that is Dostoevsky, right? And in a similar way, but even infinitely more so, right? God experiences every single human life because he is the creator, he is the knowledge, he is that which makes every human life exist. And first of all, to say that God existed somehow more in Jesus than anybody else, I think is just patently false. But Jesus just isn't all that. And like the attempt for Christians to make him all that, like, he was never a father. He was never a husband. He was never, like, there are so many things that he wasn't. So that whenever Pajot says Jesus' story is the best story, I have to say, well, first of all, then why is it told 4 different times in 4 different ways? And why the rest of the Bible? Why everybody else in the Bible? If it's all about Jesus and nothing else, then it's, I mean, the focus on Jesus is clearly idolatrous.
Well, it's not only about Jesus. This is what I would say is that, okay, is this the ultimate reality that we live in right now?
Not at all.
Okay, so what we are living in is a prototypical reality, some sort of foreshadowing of reality to come. Like, I mean, this is my way of conceiving of it because, because like I said, anything I make, I can't just make things. Like the imagination part has to happen as well. I have to think of the thing before I can make it. And so in a sense, and when I go through the process of making things, I think about what if this goes wrong, or what if that goes wrong, or what if I do these different things, and I imagine all the possibilities I can think of, but the only one that gets created is the ones that fulfills the ultimate purpose that I want. So what happens to all those other things? They just don't exist or whatever. So, I mean, Jesus, it's not just about like the finished work, the atoning thing, because, God has this arenic quality. The universe is in God. Everything is in him. He created it. He didn't appear in a space and then create a world next to him in that space. There was no space. There was just him. So everything that's good that God wants in what I would say the ultimate creation, the new heavens and the new earth, the thing that he ultimately desired to create, is in Christ. That's what it says. And we are in Christ. It's like the ark. All the good parts of the world that Noah lived in made its way into the ark, and then it was closed up, and then God destroyed all the stuff he didn't want, and then what emerged.
This is the good stuff. This is all the good stuff. This is none of the good stuff. This is the bad stuff. This is the bad stuff.
Yeah, well, that's the flood. What comes out of the flood? What comes? Well, yeah. So he did. That's what happened.
Is it?
His flesh perished, and he rose again. So
he did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't see it.
Okay, that's fine. I know. I mean,
but no, Michael, it's not fine because you were just talking about the importance of the actual real, right?
It's fine because I haven't learned Hebrew yet. You have your excuse as long as I don't learn Hebrew. That's your excuse.
It's not a matter of excuse, Michael.
No,
where's Jesus? If he's really resurrected, where is he? He
is in our hearts, in my heart.
Yeah,
I have experienced him. Okay, so
the ascension nullifies the incarnation.
No, it doesn't. First of all, I don't necessarily think that he is not in bodily form all over the place doing all sorts of things, because there's one I read the other day of Jesus appearing to a guy, a Muslim guy, a Hezbollah jihadi guy in a prison, standing before him.
Yeah.
And he says, "I'm Jesus Christ," and the guy becomes a Christian.
Well, I'm glad he had a
and he was in Iran,
yeah,
spouting words to some guy,
yeah,
right, who's writing them down, and he says, "What is this book? A man in white gave it to me," and then he brings it to somebody that can read it and says, "That's the book of John."
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, Jesus is all over the place doing all sorts of things. I mean, the world is combinatorially explosive, but if I want to spend 18 hours a day just listening to testimonies of things that Jesus is doing, I can do that. So
you could, yeah, but that would be idolatry and it would destroy the world.
No, I just listen to it some, and then it encourages me to go and share those things with other people.
Look, I am very, very happy that Jesus inspires people to move from Hezbollah to not being Hezbollah, or you from like your normal idolatry to being less idolatry. And that's, when David Brooke became a Christian, I was sure that was him moving towards godliness as opposed to what he was before. But ultimately, if we're looking towards the ultimate end, in that ultimate end, this falls away. The crucifixion falls away because that is death.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on one hand, I don't know. I mean, is creation's eternally existent on God's decision to keep it existing? And in one sense, I think Jesus is always there on the cross, but he is also resurrected, and he's walking among us. And one day we see him face to face.
I go back to I think Christianity is viewing the light through a glass darkly. And I think eventually Christians will actually know as they are known. But like ultimately, that's I see, and I mean it goes back to the thing we constantly end up back at. Like, if I really saw that people who were truly committed to the Torah actually came to believe Jesus is the Messiah through their involvement in the Torah, right? Like what it says in John, right? If you believe in Moses, you would believe in me, right? That I've never seen that be true. I have never once, and I went searching, seeing that to be true. I have seen many cases where through the development of their Christianity, Christians have become Orthodox Jews. And that's the type of testimony that shows me a progression, right? I'll give you that Christianity is a step up from belonging to Hezbollah. Yeah. But the question becomes, is Christianity the fulfillment of Judaism, or is Judaism the fulfillment of Christianity? And I think all the evidence points to, and each person has to look at the evidence for themselves. But for me, the evidence is quite clearly that Judaism is the fulfillment of Christianity, not the other way around.
Well, I mean, I don't necessarily think it must be one or the other. I think because I'm not, I don't hold to the replacement theology. I think that is destructive, and that's why I don't have this. I do have to say, like, I think as long as I don't know Hebrew, and you say that I cannot understand your point of view until I do, then you do have an.
Hold on, I've never said that.
Okay.
I've never said. Look, I don't think God does not reveal himself to people who can't learn Hebrew. I think that a refusal for somebody who can learn Hebrew, and it's perfectly understandable if you can't. You try to know God as best you can. But I think it is a deliberate refusal of Christians to learn Hebrew, because the only way you can maintain the scriptural mistakes of Christianity is by not knowing your Hebrew, because you have to have that type of distortion that translation allows.
Well, but everybody that's translating the Bible knows Hebrew. and there are many,
Correct,
many Christian missionaries. Like that's the
but you choose, but like they
if
pull
I if
translators off the translation committees because these people don't agree with your Christian values. That's part of how a translator is chosen to translate the Bible, is whether or not that person believes in Christianity.
Yeah, but it's not the propositional belief. It's the being a Christian. So that's the difference. Like, because there's lots of people that can say the right things to be a pastor, and occasionally they get in charge of places and it doesn't turn out well. But those who have a good ministry is because they actually believe it. It's a spiritual reality to them. So if somebody, like if somebody doesn't believe that, it's not just about saying that they have the beliefs that are orthodox. It's about actually believing it. Not just on the propositional level, I guess you could say.
But the fact, I mean, it comes down to, yeah, I actually think this is part of what's led to the problems we have with academia these days, is people who don't live according to their beliefs, right? There's a joke that gets told in Orthodox Jewish circles a lot, which is this professor of ethics at a university gets caught doing disgusting things. You can say whatever the disgusting things are, and they say to him, "You're a professor of ethics. How come you don't live according to ethical standards?" And his response is, "If I were a mathematician, would you expect me to be a triangle?" Right? Um, the so there is a sense in which sometimes, like, yeah, I teach parenting classes. I've never actually been a parent, right? And I have to say, despite never having been a parent, I would be a much better parent, and I understand parenting a lot better than the people I teach parenting courses to, right? But ultimately, I think the reason Christians have, for thousands, like, it's one thing to translate the Bible to a different language, and because you're bringing it to them, it's a completely different thing to sit there studying, like, KJV only people, right? They're like, okay, why are you not teaching your kids Hebrew? Why are children who can easily learn, right? If you're spending all this time trying to educate your children in the Bible, why aren't you actually spending the time to learn the one of the easiest languages that it's possible to learn? Like, Hebrew is infinitely easier than German or even Spanish or French, right? So why is it that Christian society has eschewed Hebrew for so long? And I mean, Jason says, "Jacob, you're being too generous. You can't even maintain it with the English translation." I have to say, part of that is now that we can compare translations, and at the very least, like, now pretty much every Christian has heard the Jewish argument why in Isaiah 7 it doesn't actually say virgin, it says young woman, right? But 50 years ago, that wasn't the case. And Christianity is just going to have to update itself with an actual knowledge of the Hebrew scriptures. And I have to get back to the Dead Sea Scrolls. If you don't believe that the Dead Sea Scrolls are a revelation from God, an absolute miracle, I don't know what counts as a miracle in the world, right? Like, what God had, like, I guess you could believe in some naturalistic way that it just happens to be that the Dead Sea Scrolls were preserved for thousands of years without anybody finding them. But, I mean, come on. Like, that's as miraculous as anything that's happened in my life. And what the Dead Sea Scrolls have done more than anything is validate the Masoretic text. Like, even 20, 30 years ago, and even recently, I mean, I've had people tell me the Masoretic text is 1,000 years old and the Septuagint is 2,500 years old.
I don't have any. I have no opposition to learning Hebrew, and it's something I would gladly do when I have more time
I'm
to
more
focus on
concerned about
it.
your daughters learning Hebrew than you learning Hebrew.
Well, yeah, I will. Well, yeah, fine. I'll do. We'll do the Aleph with Beth together once. I'm waiting until my daughter learns how to fully read English,
Okay.
and then
you
before introducing new letters and characters and stuff. So
Okay.
she's getting close. But
How old is she?
5.
Okay.
You know, it's not like, honestly, it's. I mean, I don't have the rigid faith like the KJV only people that hangs on such a tight string of propositions that if one falls out of place, the whole thing crumbles. I'm basically, living under the assumption that I must be 99% wrong about almost everything. But I know that the reason why my father's a changed person, not on drugs, not afflicted by demons, is because of Jesus and because of Christians who profess Jesus. I know the reason why my mom and my dad met each other and got married is because of Jesus. I know the reason why my relationship with my parents is better than it's ever been is because of Jesus. I know Jesus is the reason why I am married to the woman that I'm married to, which means part of why my children have Jewish heritage. And obviously getting to know you and the other people has been a good thing for me, because, I can see, I don't have the view that I probably had when I was a lot younger, the way a lot of Christians do talk about, like, the Jews as it's presented in the New Testament. I mean, I have my suspicions that they might have been in a rough time. I think that Jesus, whether he is explicitly mentioned, I'm thinking some of those Pharisees probably gave a good long thought about some of the stuff he said, even if they didn't want to give him the credit for whatever decisions they came up with on some things. I think that he had an impact, even if it was not necessarily that that all the Jews became Christians right away. Like, I think God has a longer term plan than that. And if the Christian problem is that they're wrong in some sense about the nature of the incarnation, it doesn't really. It probably doesn't matter now. Like, because if Jesus was just a prophet who died horribly, it's still the reason why people that are not Jews are no longer pagans. So, I mean, I personally, I think when it comes to text criticism and all that stuff, all the best evidence that props up the Hebrew scriptures is even more so supporting the validity of the New Testament. So if you want to, you can't have one without harming the other. If you really want to defend the Hebrew scriptures and their claims as best you can, you probably should take some of the evangelical scholarship seriously that also supports the New Testament. So, but I don't know.
I'm not sure what type of bombs Jason thinks you're dropping. Um, I mean, I am perfectly um, in agreement that Christianity has helped prepare the world for something better. I think that the advent of Christianity, but I mean, I'm not saying anything that's new or controversial except to Christians. Like when Maimonides wrote precisely that in his Mishnah Torah, the Christians were the ones who censored it, and it was censored for hundreds of years um, because Christians were offended that that Maimonides said Christianity exists to prepare the world to better understand the Old Testament, right? To understand Judaism and the truth of Judaism. Um, and I mean, going way, way back to somebody, who was it who asked, do Jews, it was Ben Franklin. He said, do Jews want to be understood? They're not proselytizing religion. And it's like, yeah, we want to be understood, but we don't believe that it's our place to make God's understanding understood, right? It's this is what God like makes happen in the world. And ultimately, I think that is what God is making happen in the world. Without without like that's how I understand Isaiah 53. He opened not his mouth as a sheep to the slaughter, right? He went silently, and it says over and over, he went silently. And that's what we as Jews are commanded to do. Is um, I I think we've taken it way too far, in that when people ask us, we and I did it myself. Like I would avoid the discussion because I didn't want to say the wrong thing, and maybe I should continue to avoid the discussion because lots of people think I'm causing anti-Semitism, and maybe I am with the things that I say. But um, is it a matter of not wanting to be um, understood, or like I want to be understood? I don't know that I have the capacity to make myself understood. And I'm not, and like you said, like, it's not like I'm positive that I myself understand, right? When I describe things, when I explain things, this is just my best understanding right now. I'm causing anti-Jacobism. One thing Luke said, language, period, and translations are not one-to-one correspondence. There are many correspondents. Watch Ted's poetry lecture. Yeah, but the thing is, the Bible is poetry. And when you pretend to translate poetry, you're just, I mean, there's just no way. It's futile. That doesn't mean I don't want people to be exposed to the beauty of the Bible if they can't understand the Hebrew. But I will say that I have never once met a single Jew who knows Hebrew who believes that, um, who has said, "Oh, I don't believe in Genesis. Like I don't believe in the Genesis view of creation because I believe in evolution, and therefore I don't believe in Judaism because." Genesis 1 is one of the most obviously poetic texts in the entirety of the Bible. Like it is so poetic. Like there are letters, there's only 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. There are letters that only show up like a few times in the entire chapter because it is so poetic. So yeah. So and sorry, but this is a mistranslation. Uval etzion goel mishaveh pesha b'Yaakov does not translate, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. That's actually definitely not it. You wanted to show this?
Yeah, just this is this video here. I just put the link in the thing. Oh, I guess I didn't put it in the comments. I just put it in the private chat. So we'll paste it there.
I can. Yeah, you can just play it.
Well, I'm not gonna play the whole thing. It's a whole interview, but it's cool. So this guy,
it's an hour long.
Yeah, he works for Logos Bible software, but the guy he's interviewing is a Bible translator to some country, and he shares his website where you can look. It's just really cool because you can type in any verse, and if there was any interesting thing that they had to, like, if there was no obvious word or whatever in a particular language, and they had to make some kind of adaptation or whatever to translate the Bible from Hebrew into whatever language they're translating it into, it gives you like the back translation back into English of what they did. So it's just interesting stuff, like how some of those South American language, when they talk about the serpent in the garden, like they couldn't use the word, like the regular word for a snake, because it had some specific meaning in that language, and they couldn't use, like, the other choice was like a crocodile, but that wasn't what it was. But then they had this like mythological name for some like snake god kind of a thing, and they use that word instead. So it's just an interesting thing, like, in that sense, the translation to that language makes the significance of the snake in the garden more readily apparent than in English or whatever. So, but it's a cool website. You can play around with it. So, I guess I could just get the link for the website out of the description too.
I'm glad Christians are playing with so much of like the various translations, and like that's what my channel started out being, was was actually showing people how to use the various websites to try to get better at the Hebrew. That's what my channel started as. Again, I don't think it's impossible for someone to use a translation to get to know God better. I do think that it is. Yeah, that's not going to show up on. So put it in the private chat. So I'll put it on the thing.
Yeah.
But I'll put it on my channel. The what you call it. But yeah, my brain is starting to fry. But I do think there's something important about the Hebrew, and I do think ultimately learning Hebrew does help you. Now, you mentioned Aleph with Beth, and so Andrew, who is Beth's husband, is he actually works on Bible translations, and so part of the reason they made the Aleph with Beth channel was to help, because what usually the way Bible translations are done is they're translated from English to the whatever language they haven't been translated to, and then they're translated back into English, and the Bible scholars like Andrew, who know the Hebrew, will try to catch any of the problems. And Andrew kind of thought that this was adding an unnecessary extra step, or at the very least, teaching Bible translators some Hebrew would help them more directly relate to the text. So that's actually how their channel started, was teaching Hebrew to Bible translators. And look, I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful that Christian translations are getting better. I think it's wonderful that we're spending more time looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Masoretic text. And frankly, I was really surprised when we started doing the Greek Bible study to see some of the things I did see in the Septuagint. My Greek is horrible. Like, I can't read Greek at all. But like, while we were doing that, it was actually interesting. So Psalm 22 in the Septuagint, it starts out by saying, is far away from my unintentional sins, right? My salvation is far away from my unintentional sins. And when you know Hebrew, you see clearly how that's a mistranslation, right? The word there in the Hebrew is shagati, and the person understood it as shagagati, right? Which, it's very close, and shagagati is much more of a common word. And now you're talking my language. Now you're talking my language. Zephaniah 3:9. But yeah, look, I do think Zephaniah 3:9 is ultimately where it's at. That the people will turn to a pure language so that we may all serve God together. And I think turning towards Hebrew is, and a Hebraic understanding of the Gospels is the way forward.
It's just funny because the Greek Orthodox will say that it's Greek, and the Ethiopian Church says that it's Ge'ez, and I'm sure. Well, obviously, the Muslims say it's Arabic, but I don't know if the Arab Christians say the same thing, or Syriac or whatever.
Father Stephen DeYoung comes from the Antiochian Church, which is the Arabic Church, and he says it's Hebrew.
Well, I mean, I think that, and this is the thing that to me made me not have to think about, like, because I'm a creationist, but I don't have to, like, take everything in the first 11 chapters of Genesis as like that we understand it so well, because if we think, I think it seems pretty clear that we assume that text was not just something Moses said for the first time on Mount Sinai, but that was preserved through Abraham. Then some of those accounts must have been spoken in a language prior to the Tower of Babel, and we have the Hebrew record of it, and I think that whatever that language was, the Babel language, was probably much more powerful at communicating ideas than any of the languages we have now. A more poetic language, probably a language that is, based in song, even a sung language, something like that. So, But I
yeah,
think that,
materialistically, I mean, if I were just going by normal historical standards, I would agree with you. I have a faith that Hebrew is the original language, and
yeah,
it's. I mean, it is faith. It is something I believe merely because this is my religion.
it may have been, well, or it's because I'm not the Hebrew expert, but the way it talks about the languages being divided, or it's like whatever they had a great language that everybody spoke, and then everybody ended up with partial languages or something. They had to kind of figure it out from there. The way that linguists say a language has evolved over time or whatever. So it may have been the more complete version of Hebrew, but who knows? You know, but it's interesting just because like you can pack so much more information into a language than the languages that we typically all speak.
Yeah, I mean, so it goes back to a lot of what Luke is constantly talking about, which is like the more primitive and vague a language is, the more poetic and universal. And yeah, I mean, Greek is a much more exact language than Hebrew, and to some extent, I think, like, yeah, this isn't anything we're going to actually solve today.
Yeah.
I am going to give you final words because I actually have to go work and stuff. Before I do, like, behind you, is that 4 of the exact same tool, or are those different tools?
They're all slightly different sizes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Because it
different
just looks
hand
like you have
planes.
4 exactly of the exact same tool, and I don't understand why you would need 4 of that one tool.
Well, those are all vintage, and I bought them at yard sales, and they'll like fix them up and stuff. So they're all most of those are all okay. That one is big. That one is big. That one is a little smaller, and that one's really small, or the other way around. And then I have a really big one up there that you can only see the bottom of.
What are they called?
Hand planes.
Ant
They make
planes?
hand
Oh,
plane.
hand
plane.
planes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or a
And
plane.
what do they
whatever.
do?
They make things flat or smooth.
Okay. And so you would have a larger or smaller one depending on how strong you are and how big the surface you're trying to make
Yeah,
smooth is?
the big one. So the big one up top, that one is for making making the edge of a long board straight. The smaller ones are more used for smoothing out an uneven surface.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Yep.
Anything you wanted to say before I end the stream?
Well, no.
Okay.
People should go look at the stuff that I don't post that often on my channel.
Yeah.
I exist.
Michael does in fact exist. Michael does in fact exist. And it's good that Michael exists. I will end this stream.